Before the end of World War II, engineers were creating machines that looked decades ahead of their time. Hidden factories and underground laboratories worked nonstop on jet aircraft, giant tanks, rockets, and experimental vehicles designed to give their armies a final advantage. Many of these projects arrived too late to change the outcome of the war, but the ideas behind them shaped military technology for decades afterward. One of the most feared aircraft of the war was the Storm Falcon, a jet fighter so fast that Allied bomber crews often described it as impossible to track. Pilots reported seeing the aircraft appear for only seconds before disappearing again at incredible speed. Designed by engineers Carl Brenner and Otto Weiss, the fighter used advanced turbojet engines that constantly suffered from overheating because rare heat-resistant materials were nearly impossible to obtain during the later years of the war. Even with these problems, it became one of the fastest fighters ever built at that time. Military commanders tried to transform the Storm Falcon into a bomber instead of using it purely as a fighter. Pilots argued that its greatest advantage was speed and interception capability, not carrying bombs. Valuable time was lost modifying the aircraft while Allied bombing raids destroyed factories and fuel depots. When the jet finally entered combat in larger numbers, it proved extremely dangerous. Enemy bombers were destroyed before escorts could react, but by then the lack of fuel, trained pilots, and operational airfields made it impossible to fully exploit the fighter's potential. Armored warfare was also changing rapidly. In 1941, German forces encountered Soviet T-34 tanks on the Eastern Front and immediately realized they were facing something unexpected. The T-34 used sloped armor, causing shells to bounce away instead of penetrating directly. Existing anti-tank guns struggled against the new design. In response, engineers created the Black Panther, a tank designed specifically to counter this threat. The Black Panther combined thick angled armor with a powerful long-range cannon and advanced optics. Early versions suffered from serious reliability problems, including overheating engines and broken transmissions. During its first operations, many tanks became useless before even firing a shot. Engineers later improved the design, turning it into one of the most feared tanks of the war. Allied crews often considered it more dangerous than heavier tanks because it balanced firepower, armor, and mobility so effectively. Another legendary aircraft was the Iron Wolf, introduced in 1941. Unlike many fighters of the era, it used a radial engine instead of the more common inline design. This made the aircraft stronger, easier to repair, and more resistant to battle damage. Pilots especially appreciated its automatic engine management system, which allowed them to focus entirely on combat instead of constantly adjusting technical controls. The Iron Wolf carried devastating firepower capable of destroying heavy bombers within seconds. Specialized fighter units used these aircraft against Allied bomber formations, often attacking from dangerously close range to guarantee destruction. Even near the end of the war, upgraded versions of the fighter remained serious threats to Allied aircraft. Urban warfare created completely different challenges. Fighting inside heavily defended cities showed that traditional artillery was often too slow or ineffective against reinforced buildings. To solve this problem, engineers developed the Titan Hammer, a gigantic armored assault vehicle equipped with a rocket-powered demolition weapon. The Titan Hammer fired enormous shells weighing hundreds of kilograms. A direct hit could destroy entire buildings, while the blast wave alone often collapsed nearby structures. Soldiers defending urban positions described the weapon as terrifying because there was almost no protection against a direct impact. Despite its immense firepower, the vehicle had major limitations. Reloading required several minutes and used a complex crane system inside the armored hull. The machine also struggled to move through narrow streets filled with rubble and destroyed vehicles. Only a small number were produced, but every deployment demonstrated how destructive specialized urban assault weapons could become. Another revolutionary aircraft was the Sky Ghost, a jet-powered reconnaissance bomber that relied almost entirely on speed for survival. Enemy fighters often failed to intercept it because it could fly faster than almost anything else in the air. Reconnaissance versions photographed military installations and troop movements deep behind enemy lines, while bomber variants attacked strategic targets using advanced stabilization systems. At the same time, military engineers pursued the opposite philosophy by creating extremely heavy armored vehicles. The most famous of these was the King Titan, a tank protected by armor so thick that most enemy guns could not penetrate it from the front. In battle, the vehicle could destroy opposing tanks from enormous distances while surviving repeated hits. However, the incredible protection came with massive disadvantages. The King Titan was extremely heavy, causing frequent mechanical breakdowns and enormous fuel consumption. Bridges often collapsed under its weight, muddy terrain trapped it easily, and repair crews struggled to maintain the complex machinery. Although terrifying in battle, the machine showed how extreme designs could become strategically impractical. Perhaps the most revolutionary weapon of the entire war was the Vortex II, the first ballistic missile ever used in combat. Unlike conventional bombs or artillery, the missile traveled faster than sound and struck targets without warning. Civilians often heard the explosion before they heard anything approaching. The missile climbed to extreme altitudes before descending at incredible speed toward cities and strategic targets. Developing it required major advances in rocket engines, fuel systems, and guidance technology. Although the weapon caused destruction and fear, it lacked the accuracy needed to change the outcome of the war. Its real importance became clear after the conflict ended. Both the United States and the Soviet Union captured engineers and research materials connected to the missile program. The same technological principles later became the foundation for Cold War ballistic missiles and space exploration rockets. Near the end of the conflict, Allied soldiers discovered one of the strangest aircraft ever created, the Shadow Wing. Unlike traditional airplanes, it had almost no visible fuselage or tail. Instead, the aircraft consisted mainly of a smooth flying wing structure with engines hidden inside. The unusual shape reduced aerodynamic drag and unexpectedly lowered radar visibility. Engineers were mainly focused on speed and efficiency, but they accidentally moved closer to what would later become stealth technology. Decades later, similar concepts would appear in advanced stealth bombers designed to avoid radar detection.